The lilies were still fresh on Malik's grave when his daughter-in-law sat down across from me and smiled. Not the careful smile you offer a widow, not the soft, practiced look of someone pretending to grieve. A real smile. The kind that slips out when someone believes the hard part is already behind them. The conference room on Peachtree Street was cold and still. The clock ticked. Somewhere underneath the leather and recycled air, I could still smell the funeral lilies, that sweet, heavy scent that had followed me out of the church, into the cemetery, and all the way into this building, as if grief itself had decided to take a seat at the table. Keisha Brooks leaned forward, both hands flat on the mahogany, red lipstick perfect, gold earrings catching the light. She pushed 61 pages of documents across the table like she was offering me something generous. Mrs. Hayes, you've been through so much. Just sign these over to Jamal and we'll handle everything. You deserve to rest. My son Darius sat right beside her, eyes down, gold watch catching the light every time his hands moved, which was often because they couldn't find anywhere comfortable to be. Then I looked at Keisha's right hand, still resting on that polished wood, the diamond ring on her finger, oval cut, platinum setting, small side stones. Malik had reported that ring stolen 3 years, 2 months, and 11 days ago. The betrayal hadn't started 3 days ago when he died. It had been running for years. I folded my hands in my lap, out of sight, waited exactly 3 seconds. The door behind me opened, and Marcus Bennett walked in and set a sealed envelope on the center of the table. Before I tell you what was inside, comment right now. If someone smiled at you like that 3 days after you buried your husband, do you wait them out, or do you burn it all down? Type 1 to wait, type 2 to burn. Because what I chose to do next is going to change everything. My name is Eleanor Hayes, 68 years old, and I need to tell you who I was before that morning, because the woman sitting at that table did not arrive there by accident. I grew up in Savannah, the youngest of 5, in a house where the heat came through the walls in summer and the cold came through the windows in winter, and nobody complained about either. My mother worked nights. My father worked days. Between them, they kept us fed and taught us something they never said directly, that dignity is not something the world gives you. It is something you hold on to yourself, quietly, in how you move and what you refuse to accept. I was 27 when I met Malik Hayes at a church social in 1982. He was 24, already drawing freight routes on paper napkins, already talking about a company he didn't have yet like it was simply a matter of time. We married 11 months later. People who didn't know us sometimes called what we built luck. It was not luck. It was 6:45 every morning for 41 years. It was me keeping the books for the first 12 years because we couldn't afford to pay someone else, answering phones from our kitchen table on Auburn Avenue while Darius did homework in the next room. It was Malik kissing me on the top of my head every single morning before he walked out the door. Not once skipping it, not when we were fighting, not when the money was short, not when he was exhausted down to the bone. That was our life, steady and real and entirely ours. So when I tell you what Keisha was actually doing in that conference room, which she had been doing long before that morning, understand what she was reaching for. Not just a company, not just money. The entire architecture of 2 lives, built brick by careful brick over 4 decades. And she had been taking it apart quietly for years before I understood the full scope of what was being stolen. Here is what I've come to know about betrayal, especially in families. It almost never arrives as one thing, one moment, one morning when the floor disappears. It is a construction, a brick laid here, a door locked there, a ring that goes missing, a text message reflected in a kitchen cabinet. By the time you see it clearly, it has been years in the making, and the person being betrayed has almost always already felt it. That faint, uncomfortable wrongness they kept talking themselves out of, because naming it meant accepting something they weren't ready to accept. I had felt it, for longer than I wanted to admit, and it all came into the open 3 days before that conference room, in my own kitchen, at my own sink, with warm dishwater on my hands and rain against the windows. That is where this story really starts. Let me tell you about Malik Hayes, because you need to know who we lost before you can understand what was taken. 6'1", shoulders still broad even at 70, from years of hauling freight before the business was anything more than a route between Atlanta and Birmingham, and a dream he wrote on a yellow legal pad at our kitchen table. He had a scar on his left cheek from a childhood fall in Savannah, and a smile so wide that people who'd known him 30 seconds felt like they'd known him their whole lives. He drove a sensible Ford, wore flannel on Saturdays, plain gray suit on Sundays. Left the house at 6:45 every morning without fail, and every single morning, without fail, he kissed me on the top of my head on his way out the door. 41 years. He never once skipped it. Hayes Logistics started as 1 truck and 2 men, and more hope than any bank was willing to lend against. By the time Malik passed, 63 people drew a paycheck from it, 3 state agency contracts. Built from nothing, quietly, without a single press release, because that was Malik's way. You don't announce the building, you just build. And I built it with him. I kept those books for the first 12 years. I answered the phones from our kitchen table on Auburn Avenue while Darius did homework in the next room. The company Keisha was so eager to sign away, my hands were in every ledger of it, every late night, every time we weren't sure we'd make payroll and we made it anyway. So you'll understand what it felt like when, 3 days before the funeral, Malik not yet cold, Keisha walked into my kitchen like she owned the floor under her feet. I was at the sink, washing dishes, which is what my hands do when the rest of me doesn't know what to do. The water was warm. Rain was coming against the back windows of our house in the historic district, soft and steady. That sound I have always loved because it makes the world feel small enough to manage. She didn't knock. She never knocked. We need to talk about the transition. Darius thinks it would be better for everyone if the company transferred to Jamal before probate gets complicated. I kept washing. A blue ceramic bowl. Wedding gift, 1983. I turned it in my hands. I'll be burying my husband in 3 days, Keisha. I know. Arms crossed, red lipstick, leaning against my counter like she was comfortable there. That's exactly why now is the time, before attorneys get involved, before things get messy. I turned off the water, dried my hands on the dish towel Malik's mother had embroidered with little yellow sunflowers. I have kept that towel for 20 years, and I will keep it until there's nothing left to keep. And in the glass cabinet door in front of me, those old glass front cabinets I'd always loved, I saw Keisha's reflection, small but perfectly clear. She had pulled out her phone. Her fingers moved. She sent a message. I read it in the glass. He took the bait. He. Not she. He. That blue ceramic bowl was suddenly very heavy in my hands. The next morning, I drove to the Hayes Logistics office on Northside Drive to get a few of Malik's things. His photo of us at Tybee Island, his Bible, the coffee mug his granddaughter had painted at a pottery place for his last birthday. I had a key card. It didn't work. Tried it twice. Red light both times. Bradley, a junior manager Darius had brought in about 18 months back, came to the glass door with a look that had been prepared in advance. Mrs. Hayes, I'm sorry. Darius updated the access list this morning. Policy change. I stood on that sidewalk in the October cold and felt something settle in my chest. Not rage. Something quieter and more dangerous than rage. The kind of feeling that doesn't rise, it sinks. And once it's down, it stays there. Policy change, I said. Bradley looked at his shoes. Then he leaned in like he was doing me a favor. Mrs. Hayes, for what it's worth, I'd get a lawyer. Today. He started to step back, then stopped, and said the thing I think he'd wanted to say for some time. Your time here is finished. Even your own son doesn't want you looking at the financial reports anymore. Said it almost gently, like that made it kind. I stood there and let every word of it land. Then I walked to my car, sat in the driver's seat, and called Marcus Bennett. There's something worth saying about that moment at the parking lot, because people sometimes ask how I stayed calm. The truth is, I wasn't calm. I was something else. I was focused. When you have been dismissed by the person who should never dismiss you, something shifts. The grief doesn't go anywhere, but it stops being the loudest thing in the room. It moves aside for something quieter and more useful. Marcus picked up on the second ring. Eleanor, don't sign a single thing. I'll explain when I see you. That same week, Jamal, Keisha and Darius's 19-year-old boy, sweet kid, gap-toothed grin, little scar on his chin from a bicycle accident when he was 7, had a bad motorcycle wreck on I-285. Airlifted to Grady Memorial, I drove straight there. Jamal needed blood, type-specific, significant loss. The attending physician came to the waiting room and asked if any family members could be tested. Darius stood up immediately, and Keisha grabbed his arm, hard enough that her knuckles went pale. Amir is on his way, she said, too fast. Her brother, he's a match. Darius, sit down. Keisha, I'm right here. I can just sit down. He sat. I watched his face. Not grief, not even relief. The blank expression of a man who has been trained not to ask questions he already suspects the answers to. A kind of practiced absence behind the eyes. I filed it away. The way you hold a receipt you're not sure about, but something says, keep it anyway. That night, I came home to a dark house and didn't turn the lights on. I sat in Malik's brown leather armchair, the one I had tried to replace 100 times and he had refused to give up every single time, and I held his flannel shirt against my chest. It still smelled like him. Cedar soap and something underneath that I have never been able to name but always knew. The way you know a voice before you see the face. I didn't cry out loud. I never do. But I held that shirt for a long time. When I finally got up, I went to check on his study. The room had been gone through, methodically. Drawers open, files scattered, and in the small wicker trash bin beside his desk, I found our journal. The one we'd kept together since 1985. Photographs, letters, notes we wrote each other in the early years when we were too exhausted to talk but still needed to reach across the distance. In the trash. Darius was standing in the doorway. You had no right, Mama. Flat. What are you holding on to the past for? I looked at my son and thought about what it takes, what a person has to have already told themselves about someone to throw away 40 years of a marriage and feel nothing about it. Darius hadn't arrived at that coldness overnight. He'd built it slowly, the way you build anything, one small justification at a time. Telling himself I was an obstacle, then an inconvenience, then something smaller than that, until I was nothing he needed to consider. Psychologists call it motivated dehumanization, the slow, quiet process of making someone less than a person in your own mind so that what you're about to do to them doesn't require you to feel anything. It is one of the most common things people do to each other in families, and it is almost always invisible to the person doing it. I understood it. I did not forgive it, but I understood it. The next morning, through a contact Marcus had already retained, I received a preliminary mechanical report on Malik's car. Evidence of brake line interference, and a separate internal audit flagged $1.8 million gone from Hayes Logistics accounts, routed through a Delaware entity none of us had authorized. This was not just about the company anymore. This was something much darker than that. What I walked into that conference room prepared to do, and what Malik had quietly put in place long before any of us knew what was coming, is about to show you what it really looks like when a quiet person decides to stop waiting. The morning of the inheritance meeting, I dressed carefully. Simple black dress, silver earrings Malik gave me on our 30th anniversary, reading glasses in my purse, white hair braided low and neat at the back of my neck, low heels because I needed to feel the ground. I did not eat breakfast. The conference room on Peachtree Street was already full when I arrived. Keisha at the far end of that long mahogany table, emerald dress, hair up, gold earrings, perfume that announced itself before she moved. She looked like a woman who had already signed the papers in her head. Her eyes found mine when I walked in, and she smiled. Darius beside her, suit slightly too tight, gold watch, sweating already, looking at the table. A young company attorney I had never met, Peterson, too firm handshake, documents already fanned out. sat with a notary and a court reporter at a side table. The whole thing had the feel of something that had been rehearsed. Not today, weeks ago. Keisha slid the transfer documents across to me. 61 pages. The company, the properties, the accounts, every piece of what Malik and I had spent 41 years building, redirected to Jamal Carter Hayes, age 19, as primary beneficiary and controlling shareholder. I picked up the pen, looked at the first signature line, and I wrote in the clearest handwriting I have ever produced, directly across the center of the page, murderers. The room went still the way rooms go still right before something irreversible. Keisha's smile didn't fall right away. It took 3 full seconds. 3 slow, extraordinary seconds where it just stayed there, frozen. And then it slid off her face like ice off a car hood on a warm Georgia morning. "Excuse me?" Peterson said. The door behind me opened. Marcus Bennett walked in. Black suit, leather briefcase he set on the table without a word, clicked it open, removed 3 items in a careful line. A bound financial audit, a blue sealed manila folder, and a plain white envelope notarized and dated 18 months prior. He sat down beside me, folded his hands. "Good morning. Before we proceed, there are several documents Mr. Malik Hayes asked me to introduce into this proceeding." Keisha leaned forward. "This is a private family meeting, Marcus. Mrs. Brooks." He looked at her over his glasses with the patience of a man who has been waiting a long time to be correct about something. "It would be in your significant interest to sit quietly for the next few minutes." She sat. Marcus opened the financial report. $1.8 million redirected from Hayes Logistics operating accounts over 22 months. Routed through a Delaware shell company authorized by Darius. Bradley's signature on 8 transfer documents. Keisha's private account. 4 wire transfers, $412,000 listed as consulting fees. Peterson had gone the color of old paper. Then Marcus opened the blue folder. At Mrs. Hayes' request, and following the accident involving Jamal Carter at Grady Memorial, a genetic compatibility panel was run, with the cooperation of hospital records and a secondary private laboratory. He slid a single page to the center of the table. Keisha saw the laboratory letterhead. She stood so fast her chair hit the wall. "You had no right. The authorization was signed by you, Keisha, during the first night at Grady Memorial. The consent form covered a full genetic panel for family donor compatibility." Marcus paused. "You didn't read the complete document before you signed it. Most people don't. The DNA report was 1 page, plain language. Jamal Carter did not share the genetic markers of Malik Hayes. Not 25%, not 10, 0. Jamal was not Malik's grandson, which meant everything Keisha had built, the documents, the strategy, the smiling, the "you deserve to rest," had been standing on a foundation that didn't exist. A 19-year-old boy's entire identity turned into a weapon without his knowledge. I want to stay here for just a moment, because what happened next in that room is one of the most psychologically honest things I have ever watched. When the DNA result landed, Keisha didn't cry, didn't collapse. Her very first instinct, before a single word came out of her mouth, was to turn and look at Darius. Not with guilt, with accusation, as if his being in that room was suddenly, somehow, his fault. This is what people who have spent years controlling others do when the structure falls. They don't absorb the collapse. They redirect it, find the nearest available person and make it theirs before the dust settles. It happens faster than thought. It's almost reflexive. And Darius, who had spent years flinching at exactly that look, flinched one last time. Then something small shifted in him. Keisha's face went ashen under her foundation. The red lipstick that had looked so deliberate an hour ago now looked painted on something that wasn't holding together underneath. Her mouth opened. Nothing came. Darius pushed back from the table hard enough to catch the carpet and stumble getting up. "You knew! You knew he wasn't—" "Darius." Sharp, razor sharp. "Do not say another word." "You told me Jamal was Malik's blood. You used that the whole time to... I used what was necessary because you were too weak to do anything useful on your own. You lied to me! And then my son crossed that room and grabbed his wife by the arm and screamed something at her that I will not repeat here. I sat very still. I watched them tear each other apart across that mahogany table among the wreckage of what had taken 2 years to build and about 8 minutes to fall. And what I felt was not what I had expected. Not triumph, not relief. Sorrow. Not for them, for Jamal. 19 years old, lying in a hospital bed at Grady Memorial 3 miles away with no idea that every adult in his life had just failed him catastrophically in the same room at the same moment. Darius. Not loud, didn't need to be. The room stopped. Sit down. He sat. I know you've been aware of the DNA situation for some time. You didn't flinch when Marcus read that report. You flinched when you understood how much Keisha had taken without telling you. His jaw moved. Don't, not now. I looked at Marcus. He placed his hand on the white envelope. There is one final item, sealed and notarized 18 months ago. Mr. Hayes left specific instructions that it be opened only in a proceeding of this nature, in the presence of both parties. He broke the seal, flash drive, and a note in Malik Square, careful print. Play the drive first, then read the trust documents. Keisha was standing against the wall, one broken heel beneath her, arms wrapped around herself, staring at that envelope like something inside it was still moving. Peterson had quietly begun gathering his papers. He understood. Before anyone said another word, he understood. Stay with me, because what Malik recorded on that drive before he left this earth is going to show you what real love is actually capable of when it's been paying attention all along. Marcus connected the flash drive to the conference room laptop. The wall screen came on, and there was Malik, sitting in the leather chair in his home office on Auburn Avenue. Late afternoon light coming through the window behind him, that particular August gold that Atlanta does, the kind that makes everything look like it matters. He was wearing his gray flannel shirt, the one I had held against my chest in the dark 3 nights before, looking for whatever was left of him inside the fabric. He looked thin, thinner than I'd registered that August. Sometimes you don't see the thing you're not ready to see, even when it's right in front of you. But his eyes were clear, warm, completely, unmistakably him. He looked straight into the camera. If you're watching this, then I didn't make it, and what I was afraid of has started to happen. Steady voice, a little slower than as usual, but steady. Nobody in that room made a sound, not even Keisha. Darius, son. He paused long enough that I counted my own heartbeats. I have loved you since the morning Eleanor and I drove to the Fulton County Department of Family and Children's Services and carried you out of that building in a yellow blanket when you were 3 days old. I chose you, not because the paperwork required it, not because I had to, because I looked at you and I decided. And not one single morning of my life did I wake up and think of you as anything other than my son. Darius made a sound I don't have a word for, something that lived between grief and shame and the particular devastation of hearing "love you don't deserve" spoken out loud in a room full of witnesses. His hand came up and pressed flat against his mouth. I found out 4 years ago that I was born sterile, a condition I'd had since childhood that no one thought to test for until I ended up in the hospital for something unrelated, and a full panel was run. I never told Eleanor. I didn't know how. I convinced myself it didn't matter, because the family we'd built was real regardless. What we made was real. I closed my eyes. 4 years. He had carried that for 4 years without telling me. That proud, quiet, stubborn man had sat across from me at our kitchen table every morning for 4 years with that weight inside him, and had kissed me on the top of my head on his way out the door, and had said nothing. Because he didn't want to hurt me. It took me a long time to make peace with that silence. My first instinct, hearing it in that conference room for the first time, was pain. Not at the infertility, but at the 4 years of mornings when he could have told me and chose not to. That felt, for a moment, like a wall between us I hadn't known was there. But the longer I sat with it, the more I understood what that silence really was. Malik had spent his entire life being the one who held things, the provider, the steady one, the man who walked into problems and walked back out with solutions. He had no framework for sitting across from the woman he loved and saying, "Here is something I cannot fix." Some people carry their heaviest truths alone, not out of distrust, but out of a love so protective it becomes its own kind of prison. That was his, and I have forgiven it completely. I started noticing problems with the company accounts about 18 months ago, he continued. Transfers I hadn't authorized, a subsidiary I hadn't established. I asked Marcus to investigate quietly. I didn't tell Eleanor because I didn't want to worry her until I knew what we were dealing with. He shifted in the chair. Darius. Slower now, more deliberate, each word chosen. I know about the Delaware account. I know about Bradley. I know Keisha has been moving money out of this company for nearly 2 years. But what I need you to understand, what I need you to really hear, is that I also know you let it happen. Not because you planned every piece of it, because you were afraid of her, and because somewhere inside you, in a place you've probably never looked at honestly, you've been angry at me for something you don't even have the words for yet. This is the moment I keep coming back to, because what Malik said in that recording, about Darius, about the anger, is the most honest thing I have ever heard one person say about another. He was right. Darius had never been able to name what he felt toward his father. He couldn't say, "I am angry that you adopted me." He couldn't say, "I have spent my whole life wondering if I was enough." He couldn't say, "Every time you succeeded, something in me felt smaller." Those feelings were too complicated, too shameful, too tangled up with love and resentment to ever sit still long enough to be examined. So instead of naming them, he acted on them. Quietly, over years, in ways he could justify to himself as practical, as necessary, as just business. This is what unprocessed pain does when it has no language. It doesn't disappear, it finds a direction, and it keeps going until something external finally stops it, because nothing internal ever will. The most heartbreaking part is that Malik had seen all of it, every piece, and had loved Darius anyway. "I'm not going to tell you that you're forgiven in this video," Malik said. "That's not something I can give you for free. Forgiveness has to be earned, and I won't be here to see whether you earn it. But I need you to know, I see you. I always saw you. And I chose you anyway, every single day." He looked down at his hands, those big, scarred, working hands. Then he looked back up. "Now, for the record and for the attorneys present, 18 months ago, I restructured the Hayes Logistics Holdings completely. The company accounts that Darius and Keisha believe they control are real, but they carry an outstanding secured line of credit against all company assets, a line that, as of the date of this recording, stands at approximately $5 million. That line is callable immediately upon my death." Keisha's hand shot out and grabbed the edge of the table. The actual assets of Hayes Logistics, the properties, the contracts, the investment accounts, the employee pension fund, were transferred 14 months ago into the Eleanor Hayes Family Trust. Eleanor is sole trustee with full discretionary authority. Marcus has all the documentation. He paused, and then Malik smiled. That wide, warm, scar-checked smile I had loved since I was 27 years old and had no idea yet what my life was going to become. "Baby, I hope to God you never have to watch this. I hope I get to sit on that back porch with you until we're both too old and too stubborn to get up. But if you're watching, I need you to know that I built every single thing for you. Every early morning, every late night, every hard call, for us, for you. And whatever they try to take, They cannot take what we made. The screen went dark. No one moved. Then Keisha tried to stand. Managed it on the second attempt. This recording was made under duress. He wasn't competent. Witnessed by 2 licensed physicians and a notary public, Marcus said, already opening the next folder. The trust documents are fully executed under Georgia law. You're welcome to challenge them in federal court. He slid the documentation across. Keisha turned to Darius. Say something. Almost desperate now. Nothing like the woman who had slid those papers across to me 40 minutes ago. Darius looked up. His face was hollowed out. The face of a man watching the last version of his own story collapse and finding nothing underneath it to stand on. There's nothing to say. There is everything. He knew what we did. Barely audible. He knew, and he still said he loved me. He built us a way out of this, and we just... He stopped. He looked at me. 44 years I had known that face, from a 3-day-old baby in a yellow blanket to this, a middle-aged man in a too-tight suit who had let his fear and his need for someone else's approval carry him somewhere he couldn't walk back from. Mama. The door opened. 2 federal agents came in. Plain clothes, badges out. Marcus had initiated the referral 3 weeks earlier. The charges? Wire fraud, conspiracy to commit financial crimes, and, following the evidence related to Malik's vehicle, criminal conspiracy in connection with endangerment. They moved to Keisha first. She screamed, pulled, said things I won't put in this account. One heel snapped on the carpet, gold earrings swinging against her jaw. Bradley was taken from his 2nd-floor office at the same moment. Darius was not arrested. Informed, quietly, that he was a person of active interest and should not leave Georgia. He stayed in his chair until the room had emptied of everyone but the 2 of us. Then he looked at me. Mama, I am so sorry. I looked at my son for a long time. I know you are, I said. I picked up my purse, my reading glasses, and I walked out of that conference room into the October Atlanta sunshine, and I did not look back. The part where I had to be afraid was over. What came next was harder in a different way, and more beautiful than I had any right to expect. 6 months is a long time when you're moving through it alone. The dogwood on Auburn Avenue had bloomed and dropped and was starting to bud again by the time the legal side of things settled into something I could look at without my hands going cold. Keisha and Bradley entered guilty pleas in March. Wire fraud, conspiracy, financial crimes totaling just over $2 million in documented theft from Hayes Logistics. The criminal negligence charge related to Malik's vehicle was reduced for lack of direct evidence, but the civil liability attached to that investigation was significant, and it wasn't going anywhere. Keisha got 4 years in federal custody, restitution orders that would follow her long after she walked out. Bradley got 3. Darius wasn't charged criminally, but the civil proceedings stripped him of any claim to Hayes Logistics assets, dissolved the Delaware entity with its debts intact, and attached a judgment to the Buckhead property he had mortgaged to within an inch of its life without my knowledge. He lost the house, lost the watch, lost the corner office that had always, in truth, been his father's. Last I heard, he was staying with a cousin down in Macon. I didn't reach out. People sometimes read silence as coldness. I understand that. But there are times when silence is simply what remains after every word has already been spoken, received, and discarded, and there is nothing left to add that would do either of you any real good. There was something else I had to work out during those months. Something about forgiveness that I think people get wrong. Forgiveness is not reconciliation. It is not a phone call you make. It is not a letter you write back. It is something quiet you do for yourself, in your own time, so the anger stops taking up space you need for something else. I worked on forgiving Keisha and Darius, not because they deserved it, because I did. That distinction took me most of those 6 months to fully land on. In February, a letter arrived, plain prison stationery, letters drawn carefully, the way they get when someone has a lot of time and nowhere to go. Keisha wrote that Bradley had maintained a private account she hadn't known existed, that before his arrest, he'd transferred approximately $400,000 from it to a woman in Charlotte. She wrote that she had spent her first month in custody genuinely unable to understand how she had planned so carefully and ended up with nothing. She asked in the last paragraph for my forgiveness. I read it twice, set it beside my coffee cup, looked out the kitchen window at the dogwood for a while. I did not write back. What stayed with me about that letter wasn't the request. It was what she led with. Not remorse, not any real acknowledgement of what she'd done to Malik, or to me, or to Jamal, but the news of Bradley's betrayal, making sure I knew that she too had been wronged. Even in prison, writing a letter asking for forgiveness, the first instinct was still to reframe herself as a victim. I'm not saying it to condemn her. I say it because it is one of the saddest things I know about human beings. How some people can spend so long constructing their own innocence in their own minds that they lose the ability to simply say, I was wrong, without immediately attaching an explanation for why it wasn't entirely their fault. That is a prison far smaller and darker than any federal facility. I said a prayer for her, folded the letter, put it away. Marcus came by in early April with the last of the estate paperwork and a small wooden box he said Malik had left with him 2 years before, with instructions to deliver it only after everything had resolved. I made coffee. Marcus sat across from me at the kitchen table in that careful, formal posture he carries everywhere, and slid the box across. Inside, one folded letter. Malik's handwriting. That square, deliberate print he'd developed decades ago writing contracts, making sure every number was legible to anyone reading. Eleanor, I know you. I know you will handle everything correctly, even when it's hard, because you always have. I know you'll cry alone and not let anyone see. I know you'll keep the house clean and keep going and eventually be all right, because that's who you are, and I have never once known you to be otherwise. But I want you to know something I didn't say enough while I was there to say it. You were never background. You were never the one holding everything up from behind while I stood in front. You were beside me, always. Every contract, every decision, every hard morning, and every good one. Everything I built because of you. The company has enough real assets to run for another generation if you want that. Or you can make it into something entirely different. I trust your judgment. I always trusted you more than you knew, and more than I ever said clearly enough. Whatever you decide, make it yours. Make it something you're proud of. And please, my love, sit on the back porch sometimes and just rest. I loved you completely, every single day. Malik. I read that letter 4 times at the kitchen table. Marcus sat across from me and didn't say a word, which is one of the things I appreciate most about him. He has always known when words aren't what's needed. Then I folded it carefully, blew my nose on a paper towel, refilled both our coffee cups, and said, I want to restructure the company into a community foundation. Marcus looked up. Malik built Hayes Logistics on his own back and on the backs of people who drove those trucks and managed those routes and never got anything beyond a paycheck. I want to rebuild the pension fund first, pay back every dollar that was redirected away from those employees, every cent, then invite the long-term people back. And after that, operating profits go into a scholarship and workforce fund for young Black men and women in Atlanta who want careers in logistics, transportation, supply chain. Something practical, something that turns into a job, not just a certificate. Marcus was quiet for a moment. Then he smiled, that rare, deliberate one. Malik would have liked that, he said. I know. We spent 3 weeks on the restructuring plan. In May, I stood in that same conference room on Peachtree Street, repainted now in a warm cream because I could not look at those old walls and see anything but what had happened in them, and welcomed back 11 former employees, including Patricia. 18 years she had driven routes for Hayes Logistics. 18 years of early mornings and long hauls, and not one missed delivery. Darius had let her go quietly 8 months before Malik died. no explanation, as part of what I now understood had been a deliberate effort to clear the building of anyone who remembered where the company came from. When Patricia walked in, she stopped in the middle of the room, looked at the new walls, the familiar faces, understood all at once what was being rebuilt. She looked at me, crossed the room, and put her arms around me without a word. I held on for a good while. The Hayes Family Community Foundation was formally chartered on the 14th of May, what would have been Malik's 71st birthday. I wore the cream-colored dress he had always said he liked on me. I brought white lilies for the table because I had decided I was finished letting grief claim that particular flower. But the moment that finally made me feel it was truly over, the moment I can still close my eyes and live inside, came from the last person I expected. Jamal texted first. That detail matters to me more than I could easily explain. He had always just shown up before, ringing the bell without warning, the way he had since he was old enough to reach it. The fact that he texted told me everything about where his head was. He wasn't sure anymore whether he was welcome. Wasn't sure he had any right to be standing at my door. Grandma Eleanor, I know things are different now. I know you probably don't want to see me, but I just need to talk if that's all right. I understand if it's not. I wrote back, come for lunch. I'm making chicken. He arrived at noon, hoodie and jeans, that familiar long-legged walk, the scar on his chin catching the light the way it always had. He looked thinner. His eyes were older than they'd been 8 months ago. Not in years, but in the way eyes go when the world shows you something you weren't ready for and can't unknow. He sat at my kitchen table and was quiet for a while, watching me move around the kitchen the way he'd done his whole childhood. Every Sunday, every birthday cake, every ordinary Saturday that had added up to something without anyone deciding it would. I know you're not my real grandmother, you said finally, biologically. Biologically is a big word for a Saturday morning, I said. He almost smiled. I know I'm not actually related to any of you. My father was, whoever he was, and my mother, he pressed his hands flat on the table. She used me. She used me to get what she wanted, and she never told me any of it, not one word. No, I said, she didn't. How are you not angry at me? I set a plate in front of him, sat down across the table. Jamal, you didn't do a single thing. But I'm the reason You are not the reason. You are a 19-year-old young man who got placed at the center of something that adults built around you without your knowledge and without your consent. That is not responsibility. That is just what happens when the people who are supposed to protect you choose themselves instead. He looked at his plate. I heard about the foundation, he said. Mm-hmm. I was wondering, he stopped. I could see him bracing himself the way people do when they're prepared for no and trying to absorb the landing before it comes. I don't want money. I don't need anything like that. I just want to be useful. I want to work for something real. I've got my Class B commercial license from last year. I thought maybe I could start somewhere. Loading dock, freight scheduling, anything. He looked up at me. Can I drive for the foundation? I looked at that young man across my kitchen table, and I thought about Malik's voice on that recording. I chose you. I always chose you. I thought about the yellow flannel blanket, the drive to Fulton County, the particular quiet miracle of deciding, out of nothing but love, that this child is mine. Jamal had never shared our blood, and not once in 19 years had that given me a single reason to love him less. What I've come to believe, sitting on the other side of all of it, is that the relationships that last are never the ones built on obligation, or blood, or legal documentation. They are the ones built on the daily, unremarkable, completely voluntary decision to show up, to stay, to choose the person again, in the ordinary moments, in the invisible moments, in the moments when no one's watching and there's no particular reason to stay except that you want to. That is what Malik had with Darius. That is what Malik had with me. And that is what I wanted to carry forward. Can you be at Northside Drive Monday morning at 6:45? I asked. He blinked. Yes, ma'am. Good. Wear something you're not concerned about getting dirty. Malik never started a workday late. Neither will anyone who works for this foundation. That gap-toothed smile, wide and warm and completely his own. In the May light coming through my kitchen window, I could see the man he was going to become. Not because of blood, not because of a name on any document, because of what he had chosen to do with what had been done to him. On an evening in early June, I stood on the rooftop terrace of the Hayes Family Community Foundation building on Auburn Avenue, 3 blocks from the house where Malik and I had started everything, and looked out over Atlanta. The city moved and lit up below, Piedmont Park stretching green to the north, the Ferris wheel at Centennial turning slow in the last of the light. Somewhere past all of it, Oakland Cemetery, where Malik rested under a granite stone that read simply, "Faithful, generous, ours." The warm June wind came up off the street, and it carried, I won't explain this, I will only tell you what happened, the faintest trace of cedar soap and warm flannel. I closed my eyes. I stood there in the late light, in my cream dress, with Atlanta moving underneath me, and I thought about what we had actually built. Not the trucks, or the contracts, or the accounts, or any of the things worth fighting over in that conference room. The thing underneath all of it. 41 years of early mornings, hard choices made in the dark when nobody was watching. 10,000 ordinary Tuesdays that piled up, without announcement, into a life. The meals and the arguments and the long reconciliations and the grace of choosing the same person every day without being asked to prove it. That was the inheritance. That was the thing no transfer document could redirect. No shell company could absorb. No smiling daughter-in-law could slide across a table and claim for herself. That was ours. It had always been ours. And it would be ours long after every courtroom door had closed. I opened my eyes. The Atlanta sky was going orange and deep rose and indigo all at once, the way it does in June when the air stays warm past evening and the light takes its time leaving, as if it knows it has somewhere worth staying a little longer. Malik, I thought, we did it, baby. We did it. Closing reflection. This story teaches us that blood alone does not build a family. Loyalty builds a family. Presence builds a family. The quiet, unglamorous daily decision to stay, that is what builds something worth leaving behind. It teaches us that the people who underestimate us are often the most confident doing it out in the open. They count on us to be too tired, too sorrowful, too polite to fight back. They forget that patience is not the same thing as weakness. That stillness is not the same thing as surrender. It teaches us that grief does not make you smaller. In the people with the most love still inside them, grief sharpens everything. It strips away what isn't necessary and leaves only what's true. And sometimes what's true turns out to be more powerful than anything the people who hurt you were prepared to face. It teaches us that the most dangerous assumption anyone can make is to look at a quiet person who has just lost everything and decide that means they have nothing left. And maybe most of all, it teaches us that the relationships worth keeping are not the ones we were born into. They are the ones we chose. The ones that asked nothing of us but honesty and gave us everything in return. Malik chose Eleanor. Eleanor chose Jamal. And the foundation that carries Malik's name now belongs not to his bloodline, but to his community. To the 63 people who showed up every morning. And to the young men and women who will drive those routes next. That is the only inheritance that lasts, the one made of love and labor and the quiet dignity of doing right, when doing wrong would have been so much easier. Take care of the people who chose you, and let the rest find their own way. If this story moved you today, share it with someone who needed to hear it. And if you have ever been underestimated, overlooked, or quietly pushed aside by someone who thought you had nothing left, know this: your story is not over. Not even close.